Joining us now is congressional candidate for New York's 13th district, James Felton Keith. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on. Excited to talk about a number of topics with you. Before we get into some of the topical stuff, though, I did want to start off with your slogan, which is "We owe us." Can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we owe us. It's hip hop, baby. I mean, at the end of the day, our slogan is around, and our campaign is around ownership, the distribution of it, and how we include people in this economy. And so we owe us just really, it came out of a rally that we had a few years ago. I've been running for Congress since 2017, and everyone just started chanting, "We owe us," as we talked about economic inclusion and equity specific to the land we live on here in Manhattan and parts of the Bronx and a variety of other things. So "We owe us" just started happening, and we stuck with it because it's hip hop.
So I totally get the philosophy. What are some of the positions, the policies that have sprung from this starting point?
Well, sure. I mean, so our core policy is universal basic income and other sorts of basic incomes. I'm a strong cannabis legalization advocate, a strong Medicare for all, and education reform, whether it's specific to universal pre-K or education subsidies for public schools. A strong advocate for climate action of a variety of sorts. And "We owe us" really came around making our political villain ourselves. When we look at least the sort of representatives that we've had here in Northern Manhattan and the Northwest Bronx, they've sort of sat on these issues and given them a lot of lip service over the years, but have taken no real risk to make changes. And so "We owe us" was more about making ourselves the political villain instead of, say, Trump's immigrants or, Bernie's corporations or Andrew Yang's automation. Our real villain was us, and we were asking ourselves, are we willing to sort of duke it out, to die on the stake for what we believe in, or rather what we're owed?
I love the way that you're framing that, but I am curious. So outside of the initial place and the people who were there when you came up with that, when you present it that way to voters, how do they respond to that challenge? Do they get what you're trying to say? What do they think about that as a philosophy?
The younger folks are excited about it, and the older folks are like, "Run, young man, run." I sort of fit into this interesting new space. A few weeks ago, this 20, I'm assuming she was about 20 years old, she said, "I think you're the oldest millennial I know." And I just thought, sure, I'll wear that. So I'm in this interesting spot where I recognize that I'm significantly older than a couple of adults, but the old guard, especially here in Harlem, the old black guard, they look at me like this kid wants to run for Charlie Rangel's old seat, or now, Espaillat's seat. And, it's an interesting dynamic of how everyone responds. But I do think that the older folks are inspired by the younger folks and their energy. And we've seen that time and time again in American politics. So I think it's necessary. Yeah.
So in the same way that your slogan sort of is a totally different spin on how normally the people we have on the show talk about these sorts of things, you have some other terms that I would love to find out more about. So tell me about Techno Guy policies.
Techno Guy, yeah. Well, what specifically? It's more of an ecological stance on how we distribute ecological resources, how we cater to those. I think you may be talking about it's a portion of our inclusionism platform, right? So my core biopolitical philosophy is called inclusionism, and it's really geared around three core principles: the idea that people have an intrinsic value first, that they only derive that value from interactions with each other second, and that they are entitled to some equity in the value that proliferates from that interaction third. And if we're just talking specific to our ecology, I think the real objective for humans is to control everything, right? So we want to control how we build sustainability, not only to our economy or our ecology, but across the celestial and terrestrial bodies that we engage. I'm a humanist, and I think that our objective should be to leverage all of the latest tech to make sure that we live here for as long as possible.
There's so many individual policies I want to get into that'll probably have to come in a follow-up interview. But one area that I am curious about, you mentioned Andrew Yang and you support UBI. He's done a great job of elevating that as a thing that people are at the very least aware of. So I'm curious, how does your plan? What are the overlaps and what are some of the differences between the way you might approach that and the way Andrew Yang has been describing it over the last year?
Sure. I think the biggest differences are just what an executive can do and what a legislator would have to do. But, early days, I was introduced to Andrew by a guy named Andy Stern, who used to be the president of the largest labor union here in the U.S., to really advise them and communicate to them how we were thinking about how we may achieve a universal basic income. And while there are many sorts of basic incomes I'd like to see enacted at the state and municipal level, the universality that would reach all Americans, I think, really comes down to providing them with a new property that is specific to their input to overall economic productivity here. And the way we do that is really through a series of cyber and data laws that we've been passing at the state level and in Europe and Asia over the course of the past 2 years. My method for a universal basic income is really to give everyone an equity stake or a dividend in all corporate productivity, period. I'm not as interested in a tax plan or moving social safety net or welfare programs over. I think there's another bucket of money that we don't engage at all that has nothing to do with housing, healthcare, education, social safety net programs. And so I'm excited about being able to achieve some of those goals. I think they're a lot more achievable than people think because a lot of the infrastructure to argue that people are owed a piece of the economic productivity has already been built into our laws nationally and at the state level and at the municipal level.
Okay, so, I mean, it's fascinating. Hopefully in the near future we can dig into more of your platform. But James Felton Keith, really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.